Hello, everybody. Allison here, and welcome to Time Management Isn't Always About Time, 8 Steps to Break Through to Success. I appreciate you spending time together today, and I'm hopefully going to get you some tips that are going to help you to maximize those tools that you've already invested in. So I wonder if you start feeling like sometimes like there's something wrong with you. You've invested in all these tools and classes and downloads and maybe bought a productivity journal and you're using a Pomodoro timer and you're time blocking and nothing seems to work. And you start blaming yourself and think you're broken. And then you've just accepted that feeling behind is normal and that overwhelmed is a normal state of being. But what if you could identify what's getting in the way of these tools being effective? What would that mean to you, to your mental health, to your physical health, to your career, to your success, to your team success? So let's see if we can figure out what's getting in the way and give you the help that you need. So usually there's 2 culprits. One of them is boundaries and the other is fear. And we're going to talk about those both today. What this isn't going to be is go meditate and go sit in a corner quietly and all of a sudden all your problems are solved. While meditation and all those mindfulness tools are extremely important, there is also practical things that you can do to break through and be able to set boundaries and be able to conquer fear. So today we're going to talk about what boundaries are, why they help, and that might be obvious, but sometimes it's good to refresh. But we're also going to dig into why they are hard to set. We're also going to talk about fear, because fear is really a story. It's a story that we make up. Then we're going to explore why we make up these stories, and then we're going to figure out how to bust them. But before we go any further, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So the boring stuff is I'm a 30-year tech industry veteran. I have a master's in electrical engineering, and I started as an engineer, and I moved into sales and marketing, strategy, leadership, various roles. I've worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, and I also was able to work for 7 startups and had 6 exits, including IPOs and acquisitions. And then when I left my career, I became a certified executive coach, and I'm a startup strategy consultant. A little bit more about the fun about me is I am actually a former Division I swimmer and then a retired triathlete now. Everything's broken, so I'm retired. I'm an adventure traveler and shark diver. I'm a near-death survivor in 2020, which is a whole nother talk. Not part of the fun stuff, but definitely noteworthy. I'm a stand-up paddleboarder and amateur photographer. The reason I was able to live a life like this while I was in the corporate career is because I set boundaries. One of the things I did at every job interview was tell them that I'm going to abuse every vacation policy they have, but I'm going to be a top performer. And I kept my word. One time when a company I was working for got acquired by BMC Software, I moved into a strategic role and had some major accounts, some biggest accounts in the country. But I told them that I was going to Peru for a couple of weeks and I wasn't bringing my phone and I wasn't bringing my laptop. And they were shocked. No one's ever done that before. But I reminded them is that when I interviewed for the new role, they told me how many resources they had available for the company to support me. I also told them I'm a master at doing detailed summaries of everything going on and every contingency plan in case anything goes wrong. Well, I went on my vacation. I successfully climbed Machu Picchu. That's day 3 in the photo there. And nothing bad happened to the company because I am very good about setting boundaries because my vacation time is really important to me. And there's no surprises now when I went on vacation, what was going to happen or not happen. So let's talk about boundaries. Really breaking them into 3 types. But first, let's define what a boundary is. The boundary is a physical, emotional, or mental limit we set to protect ourselves. Well, what are we trying to protect ourselves from? Well, we're going to talk about that in a little more detail, but burnout, stress, bad health, ticking off the people in our lives because we have our face in our phone all the time. So those are what boundaries are. And I've broken them into 3 types: time, volume, and duration. So time boundaries are those that impose on your time after hours or even during time. It's working nights and weekends. Now, special projects might come along or big opportunities that we occasionally have to do that. But a time boundary would be the norm is that you don't work evenings or weekends. Another type of time boundary is vacations or sick time. 53% of vacation days in the world, I read somewhere, are not taken. That's blasphemous for me. I don't think I ever ended a year with any vacation days left over. And sick time, people are not taking sick time because they're scared of consequences. The other type of time boundary is quiet work time. It's blocking out time to turn off your phone, turn off notifications, close email, and go into a room and do some work uninterrupted to knock it out and get it done. Second type is volume, and that's when you just keep piling and piling and piling it on. So you're able to say no to more work is one type of boundary. You can say yes to volume, but there has to be a clear value. How would this trajectory help my career if I do this work? Does it help the company? Does it do something that I benefit for as well as the company significant enough that it's worth infringing on my time boundaries? The other volume boundary is to be able to delegate without fear. To ask yourself, does this uniquely need to be me? Is my special sauce what's needed here? Or is this something somebody else can do and I can take it off my plate to reduce my volume? The third type of boundary is duration. Duration is things like negotiating delivery times. Oh God, this one was tough for me. When I moved into sales the first time, I'd go to a potential client, we'd have a meeting, I'd take down all the to-dos for them, and I'd be like, I'll get it to you tomorrow because I wanted to be a good salesperson. I wanted to be responsive. I wanted to show them I cared. But boy, that was hard to sustain. And as I got more confident, I learned I could say to them, and I would do it with humor. I'd say, okay, I know you want it tomorrow. Everybody wants everything tomorrow. When do you really need it by so that I can take care of you and all of my customers? So when another customer says to me in the future, I need it now, I can negotiate with them so I don't impinge on the deliveries I owe you. And that always worked. And they always worked with me to clearly define something that I could deliver and still met their schedules. The other thing is binding conversations. Bounding of conversations is when somebody calls you and says, do you have time to talk? And saying, I have exactly 5 minutes because I'm in the middle of a project. If you need more time, we can schedule it later, or I can give you 5 minutes now. It's also when you schedule those minutes and say, I only have 15 minutes, keeping it to that. So it's really about setting a boundary. So there's expectations on both sides, which is always important, and sticking to it. So those are our 3 types of boundaries. Now, why boundaries help? Well, first is self-care. You are not good to anybody if you are burnt out, you're stressed, you're not eating well, you're not sleeping, you're not exercising if that's important to you. All of those things mean you're not available to do your best work for yourself or be your best self for your family and your friends. Another thing that boundaries help with is building your self-respect. Now, I'm not saying if you don't set boundaries, you don't respect yourself, but that self-respect gets magnified when you go out there and set boundaries and show yourself, hey, I'm honoring myself. It's a really good muscle to build, and you should keep building it. Now, don't go to the other extreme and get really cocky and say, no, I'm too important, right? That's not what we're trying to do. It's not self-import, it's self-respect. So there's a difference, and make sure you don't cross that boundary. The other thing when you set boundaries and build your self-respect is you train others to respect you. If you have a habit of saying yes to everything, people are just going to know they can dump on you. And they might not mean to do that intentionally, but you've trained them that that's normal. So when they start seeing how much self-respect you have, it's going to magnify how they look at you as well. Another important benefit of setting boundaries is increasing your effectiveness. If you're spread too thin, you're going to do nothing well. And it's really important to make sure the things that you've committed to, that are in your roles and responsibilities, that are in your expectations, that you do a really good job at that. And you can't do that when you're spread too thin and trying to do too much for too many people. So what happens when we don't set boundaries? Well, we've talked about some of these, but let's reinforce them because it's really important to remind yourself. First off, stress. I don't know about you, but when I have too much on my plate, I'm stressed. I often get the deer in the headlights and nothing gets done. The other thing is burnout, resentment. You get frustrated at your company. You get frustrated at the people in your life. Your boiling point, I know about you, but my boiling point gets a lot lower, and I have a really high boiling point, except when I'm stressed. The quality of your work drops, as we talk about. Your health suffers. You don't eat well, you stop exercise, you have trouble sleeping. I have one of those brains that if I wake up at 3, 4 in the morning and there's a lot in my brain, it's like a starter pistol goes off and my brain starts racing. If you can reduce that overwhelm, when you wake up, you can go back to sleep, you'll get better rest. And we also mentioned your relationships suffer. People don't always want to be around the person that's stressed out or not present all the time, and people will start pulling away from you if you do that. So one thing I want to make sure we clarify that's really important is that boundaries are not this brick wall, this impenetrable fortress you're building up to block everything else in the world out. It's more of a window. A window, if you can see here, it's got some handles and you can open and close it. So you can choose when to open and let more in, but you're not blocking out the world. You're just blocking them out right now because whatever is being asked of you right now doesn't fit into your commitments, your schedules, your obligations. So we're not building walls, we're building windows. Now, one of the things that's shocking to a lot of people is that boundaries are so hard to set. They're like, okay, I'll set boundaries. And then you go to do it. And it's a lot harder than you think sometimes. And why so? Well, first, we don't want to be looked at as being difficult. You want to be a team player. You don't want to be looked at lazy or not committed. You want to show everybody that you are really committed to the success of the company and you'll do anything possible to make that happen. The other thing that happens is sometimes you're just so flattered to be asked and feel valued. I had that happen to me recently. I'm part of a women's organization for all these amazing women leaders, and they asked me to run one of their monthly meetings. And God, I was so flattered. I didn't even know they knew I was in the meetings, let alone saw something in me that they wanted me to run it for them. And I had to think about it and say, does this move my career along at all? Is this something that only I can do? Is this something that's going to add stress? And I do a lot of other volunteer things that really are more important to me. And so I had to say no. But it was a no. I'm flattered, but I can't do it right now. And I'd love to explore this in the future. So flattery is great, but that's not a reason to say yes. The other thing is we think about repercussions if we say no. We're not going to get that raise. We're not going to get that promotion. But remember, if you're doing a better job at the work you're supposed to be doing, then the good things are still going to happen. The other reason we're sometimes scared to set boundaries is it's counter to how we were raised. We're supposed to be generous and helpful and do whatever you can to help people. But there's a line that has to be drawn to make sure that you're still effective. You can be generous, you can give advice, but you're also being generous to the company and yourself when you take care. There's a quote, I'll give you my air quotes, right? Self-care is not selfish. You're not being selfish when you make sure you're doing the boundaries so that you can show up best for everybody in your life. So what else are we scared of? Well, one of the things is thinking that your only value is being available all the time. And I have a client who gave me permission to talk about this, who was amazing, an executive, the right-hand person to the CEO, the person everybody in the company comes to. And they had trouble setting a boundary. So from the minute they woke up in the morning to the minute they went to bed, they were responding to emails, answering, workouts were suffering, stress. There were so many consequences because they didn't see the value in who they were as a powerful contributor and thought their value was availability. The other thing is self-sabotage. Sometimes, having everything clicking and everything going is scary. So we say yes to things to overwhelm ourselves because things are going too good. And so I'm not comfortable with things going good, right? Going on to the next one. We're friends with being overwhelmed. It's the comfort zone, but the normal is the state of overwhelm and behind. And so we don't know how to break up with it because having things flow is not always comfortable. And that's a big one for me. My motto for 2022 was to get into flow. And that was part of saying no to that other event and to hosting that other event is to really figure out what you have to say no to. And it's a little uncomfortable sometimes not feeling overwhelmed because you're so used to, wait, am I supposed to be doing something? And did I forget something? So we have to break up with being overwhelmed. Another reason we don't set boundaries is we don't know the words. Communication is such a key part of setting boundaries because you want to do it in a way that the person understands that you want to be helpful and that you care about the company, the success, You want to make things easier for them, but they also have to understand they might not know all the limits and all the challenges and opportunities and things you're working on right now. So setting boundaries is important. And if we don't know the words and don't know if we can do it the right way, we sometimes skip doing it. So here's the deal. Fear is just a bunch of made up stories. The acronym FEAR has a lot of ways people describe it. My favorite is false emotions appearing real. So I wrote this little Dr. Seuss poem and found my my powerful woman avenger breaking the stories open with her hammer. And so I'm going to read you my little Dr. Seuss poem. Dr. Seuss wrote stories we know in our head. We know them awake. We know them in bed. We make up stories to fill in the gap. They don't often help us. They're often a trap. We bust up the stories by knowing what's true. When it's time to bust stories, what do you do? So now we're going to learn on how do we bust up these stories? How do we stop these fears? Well, I'm going to give you 8 steps to do that. And each of these steps, this isn't like you have to keep a journal and you have to write down. This is just going to become a mode of operation for you after you practice it a few times. I tell people you have to kind of do things tactically, consciously until they become embedded in you. So let's talk about the first step, identify. So when you have those stories and those fears, you have to identify whose voice is that. We all have these saboteurs. In the work of Shahzad Hamini, he has this positive intelligence. He says, we all have a judge as a saboteur, and saboteurs are those little gremlins, the little spoilers that try to derail us in life. And then there's 9 other types of saboteurs out there. There's a high achiever, a hyperachiever, the stickler, which is the perfectionist. There's the victim. There's the avoider. So one of these voices is probably speaking to you when your fear of setting boundaries comes up. So we need to identify it. And sometimes it's fun to name it, because when you name it, it takes away its power. Even though I'm very successful in what I do, I'm a human who sometimes imposter syndrome shows up. And so I nicknamed my imposter syndrome Sigmund Fraud. And when I was a child in the Midwest, there was a kids program on Saturday mornings called Sigmund and the Sea Monster. So I have a little printout of this green sea monster to remind me to laugh when the imposter syndrome comes up, because I know Sigmund just came over to visit, but it's not time to play, and I get back to it. It might sound silly, but I challenge you to name those fears that show up. So identify, whose voice is it? Is it my perfectionist showing up? Is it my pleaser showing up? Whose voice is it? Sometimes these voices, I call them inherited beliefs. You inherit somebody else's vision of you or view of you in place of your own. It could have been a bully. It could have been someone that didn't like you at work, said something. It could have been one item in a review you had once that stuck with you. It's like when you read a book on Amazon and you get 999 great reviews, but you have one bad review, and you can't obsess about that. So you make that your identity. So identify, whose voice is it, and is it real, or is it an inherited belief? And then try to understand that voice. Well, is some of it might be true. There might have been value in that one negative item you got that you can learn from. Just because it means something doesn't mean it means everything. So really understand, what can that voice teach you, but don't make it 100% true. Then the next thing is clarity. Why did you give that voice power? What was it? Are you really tired? Are you overwhelmed? Did you not get something great in your last review? What's the underlying story that's causing you to have this fear? Now, one of the ways to counter fear is to have a champion. Everybody should have a champion in your life. Somebody that you can call that believes in you so powerfully until you believe in yourself as equally, that you can make that phone call and say, I'm having trouble here. And I'd love, what do you think? What's your thoughts about how I come across? Or am I really a team player? It could be a coworker that can help you with that. But we all have to learn to be our own best champions as well. And to remind ourselves that we're good at our job, and the positive reviews, the promotions, the raises, all of these things define how we're good at our job, and that setting a boundary isn't going to change that. But if you have someone to pick up the phone and call, that's always the best bet. I am blessed with a lot of champions in my life that also can challenge me when I need to be challenged as well, and be honest and truthful to me. So find your champions. Then the next step is to contemplate. And what I mean to contemplate is to think about the big picture for your career, either at this company, at this role, what you want next, where you want it to go, and get really, really clear on what your goals are. Because when you're clear on your goals, it's so much easier to move towards them, and then to figure out if any action moves you closer to them or further to them. So the more power you put into it, the more impactful it is to you, the easier it's going to be to set those boundaries. The next step is to choose, and you get to choose what voice do you want to believe. Do you want to believe that voice of that champion, the voice of the person that wants that future, or the voice that is scared and wants to keep you small and keep you safe? Just say yes to everything, just do everything, just be a good person and take care of everybody else. So you get to choose which voice you want to listen to. And then your next step is to release. Release that which doesn't serve you anymore. I'm releasing my perfectionist. I literally once wrote a note to my perfectionist and on a piece of paper and took it down to the beach and tried to burn it. And then the wind took it and it got wet and I had to keep trying to light a match to try to do it. And boy, it was fighting me, but I released my perfectionist. I know that might be a little woo-woo or ceremonial, but it could just be as easily as saying, you know what, I'm releasing the perfectionist. I'm very good at my job. I'm doing a good job here. And while I have a high standard, perfect is unattainable and I can move on. And the last step is to celebrate. When you make these choices, when you conquer one of these fears, no matter how big or small, we need to celebrate. There's this misnomer that until we're at the final outcome, we can't celebrate because somehow if we prematurely celebrate, it will take our focus away. But the Super Bowl was just recently. They celebrate when they got a touchdown. They celebrated when they got a sack. They celebrated when they got a first down on a third down situation, for those of you who follow football, right? You are allowed to have celebrations of small victories and remind yourself that you're doing a good job and you are moving forward. So any forward motion should always be celebrated. So let's recap. We're going to identify the voice. We're going to understand if there's any lessons in it. We're going to understand why we gave that voice power. And then we're going to create a stronger voice of a champion to counter that. We're going to contemplate the outcomes and the goals that we want. And then we're going to choose the voice that's going to get us to that outcome over the voice that's holding us back. And we're going to do that by releasing the voice that's holding us back. And then we're going to celebrate that we got there. Now, one more thing I'm going to tell you is bonus tips for you leaders, because your leaders have to, as a leader, you have to understand that not everybody on your team is confident enough to set boundaries with you. So you need to make it easier for them. One of the ways you can do that is to not send emails late at night or at weekends. Most features now have the ability to put them in a queue and schedule them, because people feel like, well, if the boss is working at 9 o'clock at night, then I better be. Or if the boss is working this weekend, he's going to think I'm a slacker if I don't. So make it easier for everybody. Don't let your emails go out till 8 o'clock on the next morning or until Monday morning. Also make it easy for them to say no to you. Give them choices. Hey, I have this new project, but I wanted to check on your workload right now. If you're able to do that, would this be possible? Or maybe there's somebody else to do it, but just let me know, because I want to make sure that your priority, your priority. Your priority is to get what's on your plate done. Just let me know if you have the bandwidth to do anything else. The other thing you want to make sure is that they feel safe to take their vacation time and their sick time. One way to do that is to make sure you're taking your vacation time and sick time so you can lead by an example. So as a leader, while your people on your team are building their boundary muscles and their confidence muscles, help them out, give them a hand and help them get along to it. So let's bring it all together and tie this back to the goal of today, which was how to make sure your time management tools are effective for you. So we know that fears create stories, but these stories are usually not true, and they prevent us from setting those boundaries. We know that not setting boundaries block us from successfully implementing what we need to do to be successful at what's currently on our plate. And successfully implementing time management strategies helps us excel at work because we're not spread too thin, we can do well. and we can enjoy our lives. One of the other benefits that shows up is when you start setting these boundaries, more time is going to be available on your calendar. All of a sudden, you're going to realize that by keeping conversations short that are unnecessary, you have more time. By not saying yes to things, you have more time. By not doing emails on nights and weekends, you're going to have more time and you're going to have more energy and you're going to enjoy your job a lot more. So if you want a refresh of these 8 steps and a little more detail and some examples, we got this little treasure map to it. So if you go to www.idaretobemore.com, you'll be able to get this document and reference it while you're building that muscle. And you'll learn to help yourself get out of your own way, because at the core of all of these things of not setting boundaries and the fears is we just sometimes get in our own way and we need a little help getting out of your own way. A lot of what I do with my clients is helping them get out of their own way because they don't even realize that they're actually the reason they're in their own way. As a bonus, when you go to idaretobemore.com, you'll get a confident communication guidebook. I believe there's 4 stages to confident communication, and they're important if you want to set boundaries successfully. So this is my promise to you. If you master your boundaries and conquer your fear and your stories, more time will show up in your calendar. Your self-respect and confidence will increase. And each time you go to set a boundary, it will be easier. And this is my other promise to you. You are still great at your job if you set boundaries. You are still a team player if you set boundaries. Excuse me. You are still a team player if you set boundaries. And you can better apply all these tools that you're learning here at this conference because you set boundaries. So thank you for joining. Here's a couple different ways to keep in touch. You can email me anytime if you have any questions. You can go to idaretobemore.com and download your 8 steps, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to our next conversation. Bye-bye.